Hi, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. All right, on behalf of the Chinese University of Hong Kong, we'd like to welcome you to our talk on what universities look for in freshmen. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce our panelists. We'll get started with Dr. William Fitzsimmons, the Dean of Admission and Financial Aid at Harvard College. Take it away. Joining him from Harvard College is Miss Sarah Clark Donahue, the Director of Financial Aid. We have James Miller joining us from Brown University, and he is the Dean of Admissions there. And then from our very own Chinese University of Hong Kong, we have Professor Yao Xing-tung, a distinguished professor at large at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and the William Casper Graustein Professor at Harvard University. And we also have Professor Jack Cheng, the Pro-Vice Chairman of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Now, to begin with, I'd like to introduce Professor Cheng to give his welcoming remarks.
Honorable guests, Dr. Fitzsimmons, Mr. Miller, and Mrs. Donahue, Professor Yao, schoolmasters, teachers, students, colleagues, and friends. It's indeed my great pleasure to welcome you all to this special symposium on behalf of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. We are particularly pleased and privileged to have three most experienced deans and directors of admission and financial aids from Harvard University and Brown University to share with us their experience on what universities look for in freshmen this afternoon. I would also like to extend a special welcome to some of the students and teachers who have come all the way from Shenzhen to take part in this symposium. Welcome, all. With the rapid transformation into a global knowledge-based and innovation-based society, universities and university education, including undergrad and postgraduate education, has become one of the most important agents of nation building, social transformation, driving engines of economic growth and harmonious development globally. Pursuing quality education in a good university is becoming more and more competitive, as you probably will realize from our speakers to come. Just across in mainland, this year of the year of 2006, there are 9.5 million high school students applying to the Joint National College Entrance System and compete intensively for a very small number of places in the universities, and not to talk about the top universities. In Hong Kong, we're a bit more fortunate, although more than 65% of the 17 to 20 years age cohorts can now be enrolled in one or other type of post-secondary education. Only about 18% of them will be admitted into one of the 8 universities in Hong Kong. Statistics from the Hong Kong Census and Statistics Department have shown that at any time there are over 70,000 Hong Kong students studying outside Hong Kong, out of which 75% of them are pursuing an undergraduate education. That is not a small number for Hong Kong. Okay? Majority of them are studying in Australia, UK, Canada, and of course the United States of America. And this is not surprising at all, because if you quote then the UNESCO figure and the OECD report in this year of 2006, it was noted that more than 2.5 million mobile students are actually studying outside their country, globally. And this figure is expected to rise rapidly by the IFC, UNESCO, and OECD to around 7 million in the next 5 to 10 years' time. So it is a little bit about the figures here. And I think with the rapid changes locally, globally, the educational philosophy, thinkings, and the road of the universities are facing unprecedented challenges. and will require new soul searching, transformation, new thoughts, curriculum designs, new pedagogy, new strategy, funding models, and many other changes to meet the ever-expanding societal expectations. So I'm sure we are all interested in knowing how two of our most privileged universities in the world, Harvard and Brown University, is moving forward, particularly on admission-related matters and what they are looking for in freshmen. So without further ado, I would like to invite you to join me in welcoming our special guests this afternoon, Dr. Fisherman, Mrs. Donahill, and Mr. Miller. Thank you all. Welcome once again.
Well, thank you very much. We are delighted to be here. I've been to Hong Kong quite a few times, starting in 1972. And as I said to the previous group, every time I come here, there seems to be some sort of a disaster. When I was first here, it was sometime in the early 70s, I guess, and there was I missed by about 2 hours being hit by that building that slid down the hill during the torrential downpour. One of the other times I came, it was right around 1997, I guess, just before the new airport went in. I was on one of 6 planes to land during a 12-hour period during the beginnings of a typhoon. It turned out to be I guess it was 8 or 9 force typhoon. And those of you who had the pleasure of landing at that old airport know what I mean. What a terrifying adventure it was to land. The press, we have members of the press here today, I know, and they met the plane asking whether or not there was panic on board. So I don't know what's going to happen while I'm here in Hong Kong, but let's hope it's not another disaster. We're really happy to be here. We are on the beginnings of a recruiting trip, and we will be going to Hangzhou and Suzhou and then to Shanghai over the next 9 days or so. Sally and I were here, and we were in China last summer, and we were in Shanghai, Beijing, Xi'an, and Lhasa, and we had someone visiting here last spring. And I've actually visited schools in Hong Kong myself over the years. And so we're on a mission. And it's not just a mission to this part of the world, but it's a mission throughout the United States and to other parts of the world. We have a woman right now who's in the middle of a 5-week trip, recruiting first with Princeton University in Pakistan and India. And she's done that, and she's now on a 3-week trip in Africa, which is with a woman from the University of Pennsylvania. And so we're looking for talent. We're looking for freshmen, to go back to the title. We're looking for students from all over the country and all over the world. And I was told during the break here that one of our graduates, Yo-Yo Ma, who is a world-class cellist, I guess that's a relative of his up there, the last picture on the left, who has some history with this university. We have with us, of course, the great Yao, as we call him, Professor Yao, who is one of the greatest mathematicians China or any place in the world has ever produced. These are we're looking for people with all different kinds of talents. And this talent might include someone who would be interested in government service. It could be in the private sector. It could be anything. I mean, I could give you all kinds of examples of some of the people we're looking for. Unfortunately, Professor Hu Xiuying could not be with us right now. She is 100 years old. I think she is a bit under the weather with the flu, but she went to Radcliffe, which is part of Harvard. Originally, it was part of the undergraduate division of Harvard, part of what we do in admissions and financial aid. But it's now an institute of advanced studies, And our new admissions office, into which we moved about, 13 days ago, it was part of Radcliffe College, where she came and received her education and has gone off to make a huge difference. We're looking for all kinds of things when we, or Brown University or any of these universities, go about constructing a freshman class. If you want to, and Jim will go through in some detail to give you a sense of how thorough the processes are in terms of the selection process. But when you think of universities, you typically would think of simply academic talent alone. And there's no question that academic talent is important to us. You might be surprised to learn that Harvard has won the United States Math Championship for undergraduate students 14 out of the past 20 years. And we could say, my, how lucky, isn't that interesting? Well, it isn't really luck, as it turns out. It's a lot of good recruiting on the part of the admissions office, but also a lot of good recruiting on the part of our mathematics department. And one of the things we do every year as we go through the 23,000 applications is we come across some people who have done well on their standardized tests, and they seem, according to their mathematics teachers in high school, to be truly unusual in that context. And they may have done well in national or international contests, and they may have produced some original work for us to look at. And Sally and I aren't going to be able to tell whether that work is any good, but what we do is pass it on to our faculty, and they can tell us whether that's good. So as it turns out, they can almost tell us ahead of time who the people will be who will be on that math championship team. Some cases they say they can tell us when they're as young as in the 10th grade. So there are lots of different pieces, I guess, as we think of it. So there's academic talent, but as Jim will tell you, there's a lot more to it. And there's a professor at Harvard who's worked for many years at the Graduate School of Education by the name of Howard Gardner, and he talks about his theory of multiple intelligences. And what he says is that there is what we would call mathematical intelligence, perhaps. So there is what we might call verbal intelligence. But there's also interpersonal intelligence. There's also intrapersonal intelligence. And there's kinesthetic intelligence. And there's musical intelligence, and spatial intelligence, and artistic intelligence. And he now has what he calls existential intelligence, whatever that might be. So there are probably 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 different kinds of talents or intelligences that are important, both in terms of being successful undergraduates and in being really successful people later in life, whether they turn out to be world-class cellists, world-class mathematicians, or heads of state. So as we go through the process, we're trying to figure out not simply who can do the work, because most of the 23,000 people who apply to places like Harvard can do the academic work. We're trying to figure out who might be truly unusual. One of the things that we look for, and this is a bit of a cliche, forgive me, is leadership. And I had to give a talk on leadership to our alumni a little while ago, and so I went through the literature that's out there about leadership. And frankly, there's a lot of stuff written about leadership that isn't worth the paper on which it's written. And there are lots of stuff in the business world, quite frankly. They'll write you a book on leadership, and they'll take some CEO and use that person as example of greatness, and then 5 years later, of course, the person takes the company right down the tubes. So, it's very hard to know what leadership is or isn't. But it does have something to do with talent. And I think that's probably, intelligences in Howard Gardner's terms. It probably has something to do with commitment. In other words, the idea that you're going to take something in which you believe and you're going to follow that to the end of the earth. And sometimes, in fact, most times probably it's, they always say that it's much more perspiration than inspiration, but the idea is sort of staying with things. But it also has something to do with character. And Jim is going to tell you a lot more about how we try to figure out who has character and personal qualities. But when you think about, you probably have heard of the Enron Corporation in the United States. This is a company that was playing a massive shell game of sorts with energy futures and so forth and so on. And turned out it raised a lot of money, and turned out, frankly, that there was an awful lot wrong with what they were doing. They essentially were defrauding not just their investors, but they were harming, in many respects, lots of citizens in the state of California, among other places. And the thing went down, and the thing that bothers us is that there were probably more than a few Harvard people associated with Enron. And these are people who, and there are people who had graduated from lots of other very fine universities as well. And they were incredibly smart, incredibly talented people. They were incredibly committed, in this case to committing fraud, but in any case they were incredibly committed. But they had no character. And they lacked basic fundamental personal qualities. So I think, you know, this is the kind of thing, I think when we go through and try to figure out whom we're going to admit, I think one of the things we spend a lot of time on is trying to figure out who has character and who doesn't. Right now, Harvard University, and while it's America's oldest university, is probably in the middle of the most exciting time in its history. We have been totally revamping lots of things at Harvard over the past 10 years or so. And one of them is financial aid, about which Sally will talk. And this has really been quite a transformation over the past, especially the past 6 or 7 years. We also have looked at every aspect of undergraduate education. One of the things we were very unhappy with was our advising program. And Sally will talk about the new advising program that's just going in this year. Another piece had to do with getting new students, first-year students, together with senior faculty right away in small classes. We have what's called the freshman seminar program at Harvard, which these are courses limited to 12 or fewer students. And about 5 years ago, there were only 30 freshman seminars, so they only served a very small percentage of the roughly 1,675 first-year students. And now there are 130 freshman seminars, which is quite a change in a very, very short period of time, which almost meets full demand. Study abroad is another piece on which we've done a great deal of work. We used to make it hard for people to study abroad. We now make it very easy for people to study abroad, and we're developing more and more relationships with other colleges and universities from around the world. In some cases, it's a two-way exchange where we're having college students from around the world come to Harvard and vice versa. So there's a lot going on. The other piece, I guess, is the new curriculum. And we don't know quite where this is going to go entirely because our faculty just put out within the past week or 10 days a preliminary report on where we're headed. But we are going to change, certainly from a core curriculum to something that is what we would call a general education program. And we're not quite sure where it's going to go yet, but it will include a section. You take 32 courses by the time you graduate. You take 4 each semester, 8 a year. So you will take, in addition to quantitative reasoning and a language requirement, you will take perhaps some courses in each one of the following areas: reason and faith, or some people call it religion, but given the importance of those issues in the world today. The ethical life, Maybe we can prevent an Enron problem by having people take courses on the ethical life. Cultural traditions and cultural change. Another area, the United States, historical and global perspectives. Societies of the world, historical and global perspectives, life science and physical science. Professor Kenneth Young did a superb job, almost made our talks unnecessary in talking about our new proposals for general education and how similar they are actually to the general education requirements of the Chinese university here. And it's interesting to see the convergence as we try to make sure that our students are ready for this new globalized world. Here you are doing exactly the same thing on the other side of the world. In any case, I think we're probably in the end only as good as the professors we can assemble. We try to get the best students in the world, best professors in the world to come teach at our institution and do their research. We work hard to try to get the best facilities, but the other piece is, as I say, we're working very, very hard to try to get the best students, however you define best. And I think one of the things we do, I think all of the institutions in the United States that are like Harvard, they're nationally and internationally competitive, almost all of the students with whom we admit, almost all of them end up graduating. We have a retention rate 97 or 98%. If they show up September of the freshman year, they're pretty darn likely to graduate for a whole variety of reasons. One of the reasons has to do with the nature of the residential community. I know the Chinese University here is working hard to create even more residential space. Virtually all of the students at Brown and Harvard live on campus. And I think it is very hard to measure how important it is to receive that education directly from your fellow classmates on a 24-hour-a-day basis. One of my good friends is a Harvard graduate of the class of 1923, Al Gordon. He is 105 years old. He ran his first marathon. This is 26 miles in London at the age of 81. He is still going strong. But he always said, and this was, I must say it was a very different Harvard that he attended, but he felt that one of the very best things about the education was the diversity and the education he received from his fellow classmates. Even the Harvard I attended in the 1960s was vastly different from the one today. The ratio of males to females was 4-to-1. Males to females. There are now slightly more females than males at Harvard. There were very few students on financial aid. I was one of them. We had no money. My parents had not attended college. Today, as Sally will say, 70% of the students at Harvard are on some kind of financial aid. And there were very few international students. Almost none to speak of. I could practically count them on both hands. And today, as a result of big changes and lots of recruiting over the past 10 years or so, we're about 10% pure foreign national today, about another 5% U.S. permanent resident and something else, 5% U.S. dual citizen and something else, and of the 80% of the rest of the students, about 20 or 22% of them have a language other than English spoken in the home. So what you have at Harvard is a moving target. We're in the middle of creating something very new. We have more land on the Boston side of the river than we have in Cambridge, where most of our classrooms and dorms are now. We're busily transforming in a project that will take us, we're breaking ground on one building very soon, a science, 500,000 square foot science building where we'll be doing stem cell research and we'll be working on the Human Genome Project with the Broad Institute in cooperation with MIT. But we're creating a whole new Harvard across the river that will go up before our eyes over the next, as I say, next few months up to the next 50 years. But in the meantime, we need to get those great students who are going to help us think about how to make the new Harvard as good as it can be. And we hope as they graduate and go on to success will help us create the new Harvard down the line. And to talk about how we make those decisions, and in a sense what we look for in freshmen, is the legendary James S. Miller, Dean of Admissions and Financial Aid at Brown University.
Dean Fitzsimmons, thank you and welcome. I'm delighted you're here. Before I start, I have a confession to make. I've been doing college admissions for 27 years, and I've read 350, 400,000 applications in my lifetime. And I've watched students and parents go through this process for 27 years, and I talk to parents a lot about it, and I'm really good at talking to parents. I'm very convincing, I'm very warm, I'm very good. My daughter went through the process this year, my only child. I stand before you a very humbled man. Those of you who are about to apply to university, please be kind to your parents. It's a tough process. It's a very emotional process. Your parents can't help who they are and what they are. My daughter finally threw me out of her process several times. As I said to her, this is the only time in your life I will ever be helpful to you. She wasn't moved. So please be kind to your parents as you go through this process. It's hard on them as well. I have now worked in 3 different universities. I was one of Bill Fitzsimmons' colleagues for 20 years at Harvard in the admissions staff, and I'm now the Dean of Admissions at Brown. So I've seen 3 different institutions now make admissions decisions, and they all make them the same way. They're competitive institutions. So let me tell you how it works. Let me tell you what we do as we go through this process. The process of applying to American universities is different, obviously, from applying to HK universities. What we ask you for is a lot of information that you don't provide as part of your application to HK universities. We get a lot of stuff from you when you apply, and let me walk you through the stuff that we're going to ask for. We're going to ask you for your academic record, your test results, your curriculum, your SAT examinations. We're going to ask you for that information when you apply, assuming you take SATs or you have access to them. We're going to ask you for some essays. We're going to ask you to answer some questions about yourself. Each institution, like Harvard and Brown, asks slightly different questions, but we're all trying to get at information we think is important to our decision-making process, and to get at things that are not necessarily capable of being quantified. We're going to ask you for references from teachers in your institutions. Most of us will ask for 2, and we'll ask for 1 from your college advisor or career advisor or whatever the appropriate level is at your institution. So we'll probably get 3 different references from you. They can be from anyone, but we would prefer they be from academic subjects, and closer to the end of your career than to the beginning of your career. For those of you who are going through the process now or about to go through the process, let me give you a little piece of advice. Ask teachers early in the academic year, because they will get a lot of requests along the way. And the other thing to do is, after you ask them, wait about 2 weeks and then write them a very nice thank you note. And the reason to do that is because it's good manners. And the second thing is that if they haven't written it yet, you will make them feel guilty, and they will write it right away. So write them a very nice thank you note. Some of us, not every institution like Harvard and Brown in the US, but a number of us will try to have an interview with you, either in person or via the telephone, just to get a sense, ask you some questions about yourself, and give you a chance to talk, ask the questions that you won't ask us today about Brown or about Harvard. So we do get a lot of information. The most important piece of information we get is what you've done day in, day out in your secondary careers, and that is through the transcript, through your academic record, because it's what you have done every day, and it's evidence of what you've done. The process it varies a little bit from institution to institution, but one of the things you should know is that when you apply and when we get all this information, we actually read it. We really do sit down and read it. I know there's a fear that we don't look at it. Someone said to me, I know what you do. You run around and you hold up applications and you laugh and you say, I don't believe this person applied. Well, as I said to the student, we very rarely do that. No, we don't do that. I'm only kidding. We know it's hard to apply to college. We know it takes courage to apply to an institution, particularly if you're applying from here to the U.S. And we treat every application with respect and with dignity because we know how hard it is to go through that process. Every application is read. At Brown, it's read by at least 2 members of the admission staff. At Harvard, it's read by a number of members of the admission staff. And we go through the process and we read your essays and we look at your records and we look at what your teachers say about you and we do a series of write-ups and evaluations. It's a very thorough and time-consuming process. At Brown last year, we had 18,300 applications and each was read twice. Some were read 3 times, some were read 4 times. So we had 36, 38, 40,000 readings that we went through before we made a single decision. Then we sit, as does Harvard, as does most of the places like us, we sit in a committee. And committees are composed of any number of people. It can be as few as 4 or 5. It can be as many as 25. And we talk about you. And we read your applications. And we spend a lot of time thinking about you and getting the best sense of you that we can, both those things that we can measure and those things that we can't. It is a very thorough, labor-intensive, personal process. We have yet to figure out a way to streamline it. There are no quotas. There are no formulae. There are no indices. Every single student, we begin with the assumption that every single student has the opportunity to be admitted to our institutions. What are we looking for? Dean Fitzsimmons mentioned a number of things. We're looking for academic performance. We are academic institutions, so overlaying all of our decisions is the need to find students who can use our curricula well, who can take advantage of it. We look for people who are involved outside the classroom, people who have done things in their communities or held a job or volunteered or demonstrated passion and interest in something outside the classroom. And as Dean Fitzsimmons mentioned, we also look for character because we're building communities. Communities of people who are going to live together in very tight quarters, who are going to need to get along with each other, who need to understand each other and respect each other. That's not perfect. I promise you that's not perfect, that process, but we try very hard. We will never know you as well as you know yourselves or your parents know you, but we will try. We will spend as much time as we can on every single application. One person doesn't get you into one of these institutions. One person doesn't keep you out. It's the collective wisdom, we hope, and judgment of a number of people sitting around spending lots of time talking about you. These institutions are very competitive. We admit small percentages of the people who apply. The numbers of students applying will go up every year as they've gone up around the world. There is in the United States what they call the baby boomlet. There's a peak in the number of high school graduates, not nearly as many as there are in China, but huge numbers of students for us. So the competition will remain intense. But if you begin or if you start your application with the understanding that we don't have any expectation of what our classes will look like numerically, we are trying to find the best students we can, regardless of where they come from, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their level of preparation. We want to put together the most talented students we can. In truth, with apologies to those of you who are faculty members, we care what people do during their careers with us in the classroom, but what we really care about more is what they do with their lives. We're in the futures business, for lack of a better term. So we're looking for people who will not only take advantage of our institutions, but will go on and do things with their lives that they'll change their worlds, whether that world is very small, whether it's their community or their school, or whether it's a larger change, someone who makes a substantive difference globally. But that's what we're trying to do. It's not a perfect system. It is, however, the best and fairest system we can come up with at the moment. In order to build these communities, we need to make sure that every student who's earned the right to come to our institutions can attend. It is hard to get in, and we want to make sure that every single student, regardless of his or her circumstances, has the opportunity to attend. So I'd like to introduce Sarah Donahue, the Director of Financial Aid at Harvard, who's going to talk about financial aid programs at places like Harvard and Brown, and I think much of what she has to say will surprise you. because there is an extraordinary amount of money available for talented students, much more than you can imagine. And a number of us have done yeoman effort in terms of increasing the availability of financial aid to students, not only in the U.S. but around the world. So let me turn it over to Ms. Donahue.
Hi, thanks, Jim. It's a pleasure to be here. This is an intimidating process for all of you. I just actually want to get a quick sense. How many of you are actually going to be applying to colleges or universities in the next year or so? Okay. So in 2 years? And how many of you are current university students here and interested in graduate schools? And the rest of you are just here to listen to us, which is great. Well, it is, as you can imagine from the comments, both on Dean Fitzsimmons and Dean Miller's part, an intimidating process. I would imagine applying to colleges in the United States. It's so far away. We've just been on planes for about 20 hours to get here, and we're a little bit jet lagged, but it's a very far distance away. And not the least intimidating aspect of the entire process is no doubt the ability to actually pay for an education in the United States. It costs this year $46,500 US to attend Harvard College, a similar amount to attend Brown and many of the other private selective universities and colleges. I think that translates into about 363,000 Hong Kong dollars. And for most of you, I'm not going to ask for another show of hands because that would be embarrassing, and also I don't think you like to raise your hands. So, but for most of you, and certainly for most of the students in our country, that is an amount of money that is simply enormous and not possible for a family to come up with in 1 year. And so financial aid is actually a critical piece of the puzzle of being able to go to colleges or universities in the United States. Fortunately, as both Bill and Jim have indicated, there has been tremendous growth in the amount of financial aid available at a select number of schools in the United States over the course of the past 5 or 10 years. In the past 10 years alone, I think at Harvard, our scholarship budget, which is the same as grant, it's money we give to students we admit, has grown by over 80%, which is an extraordinary increase in financial aid. Brown, I'm sure, has experienced a similar growth in scholarship money available, as have a number of other of the top universities and colleges. And this money is actually available to help students who are admitted finance educational expenses. I think it's important for you to know at not all colleges and universities in the United States, but at a select number at Harvard and at Brown and a number of other schools, Cornell, Columbia, MIT, a number of others that you probably know or can find out about through your schools. There is enough financial aid available to meet the full need of all of these talented and terrific students that schools admit. And so really, my aim in speaking to you this afternoon is to convince you that if you do think that you might want to come to college or university in the United States, you should find out which of us actually offer financial aid to international students, and then simply not let finances be a barrier at all in your decision of where to apply. We admit students, as you've heard, based on their achievements, academic and otherwise, and based on their promise of future contribution to what is an increasingly global society. And we want to make it possible for all of them, we admit, to come and attend our colleges and universities without a great deal of financial pressure and anxiety. One of the things that, that financial aid is actually really designed to do, and that has been able to do increasingly at Harvard and other select number of other schools, is to actually make it possible for students to attend our university and to participate fully in the life of the college that we think is really so critically important in shaping the leaders of tomorrow. I want to tell you just a little bit about what college or university life is like at Harvard in particular and in the United States. I think probably there are some differences. I'm learning this afternoon there may be more similarities than I had previously thought. But as you've heard earlier, we actually do have really almost completely a residential college community, which means that all of the 6,600 college students at Harvard College live in houses and in freshman dormitories with students from all over the world, and really benefit largely, we think, from the education that occurs in those dormitories and houses, in the dining halls, in the classrooms, with students from an incredibly diverse array of cultures, ethnicities, and students from very different socioeconomic backgrounds. There are a number of student support services on campus that are offered as a part of this education that costs so much money and for which there's a great deal of financial aid available. And those services include things like an Office of Career Services to help students figure out what in fact they'd like to do with their future, and to connect students with alumni and leaders in the business world and the legal profession and in the arts world and so on and so forth. There is an office that helps students with study skills, particularly perhaps international students who may be facing greater challenges in adjusting to a completely new culture. There are a number of counselors available in our health services operation. In financial aid, we spend a great deal of our time talking to students and families, helping to make sure that in fact finances don't rear their ugly head and present a challenge that will affect negatively the quality of the education the student is receiving. And so we have actually additional funds that we will offer to students to help them travel home, even if it's a long way, that 20-hour plane flight, to buy winter coats if they're from a warm climate and they're cold and they don't have any money to buy the coat, to attend student events on campus if they otherwise might not be able to afford to purchase the ticket. And the list goes on, and I think at a number of other schools in the United States, what you will find, if you're interested in looking, is that there is a tremendous amount of support for the student experience in terms of financial aid that goes even beyond just covering the basic cost of attendance. At Harvard, we have in addition to all of these support services, we have over 300 student organizations of every sort you can imagine, in music, in the arts, in a lot of student newspapers. There's almost any kind of activity you can imagine that's represented in a student club. We have over 40 varsity and junior varsity athletic teams. My daughter actually graduated in '99 and was a varsity athlete. She rowed. She rowed a boat on the river, as well as concentrated in what is an interdisciplinary concentration, environmental science and public policy. And there are over 40 concentrations actually that are offered. And students actually tailor their education to their own particular interests, and will choose one of those concentrations now in the beginning of their sophomore year, and may choose to concentrate in one area and then have a sort of other minor concentration in another area. Some students even develop their own academic area of concentration. So this is just a little bit of a sampling of the life of the college and what financial aid actually supports. Bill had mentioned our new focus on the advising programs at Harvard, and what we have this year for the first time, after a great deal of effort on the part of a number of professors and administrators campus-wide, is a program where we actually match freshman students with an academic advisor who may be a faculty member or an administrator, perhaps a student in one of the graduate schools, and also a peer academic advisor who has been trained by our Office of Academic Advising. And the hope is that that peer academic advisor will be better able than am I, for instance. I've been a freshman academic advisor for years, but I'm a little bit older than the freshman now, and a peer advisor is a little closer in age, and we think better able to help freshman students navigate really what is a complex educational environment in which, students do have a great deal of flexibility in choosing which courses they want to take, and in navigating the sort of social network of the college, both in terms of how to go about meeting people, what clubs to join, whether or not to participate in intramural athletics or varsity athletics, music, theater, whatever. And so our hope is that these peer advisors will actually really serve as kind of peer mentors for these students and help them figure out how to best navigate in the Harvard environment for their particular hopes and dreams. And I guess one of the things that I should say is that, I think I said a little bit earlier, but you should, if you're thinking about coming to school in the States and finances are a consideration for you, really research which schools do offer financial aid to international students. We have done so for many years. Brown offers financial aid to international students, and there are a number of other schools that do. Some are not able to offer financial aid to international students. That might be important for you to know before you embark on this kind of scary process. And financial aid usually comes in 3 different forms. One would be in the terms of sort of scholarship or grant aid that I've been talking about. And for our students from China, of which we have a growing number, we'd like to have more in the future from Hong Kong and China. Often students really need full financial aid. We have recently enhanced our financial aid program so that students, whether they come from our country or from other countries, who are from families with family incomes of less than $60,000 US dollars, will actually find that we don't expect their family to contribute anything at all toward the cost of their education. And so we will offer that student a full financial aid package, and probably with a cost of about $46,500, that student would receive about $45,000 in need-based grant assistance for 1 year at Harvard, and then there would be extra transportation and perhaps a little bit of a loan, which is one of the other forms of financial aid, and then perhaps a little job on campus. Students can choose whether they want to have a job on campus, which can be in the form of research with a faculty member or working in one of the terrific offices like our admissions office, helping sort of file papers and so on and so forth, or if they want to borrow through a low-cost subsidized loan. I know that loans are an issue of concern for really many students, and certainly for international students who want to return to their country after they come to school in the United States. And so that's something that you should pay attention to as well. The amount of money that students have to borrow now who are coming to schools like Harvard and Brown is actually going down dramatically as the amount of scholarship aid available to students is increasing. And so we're thrilled that our average graduating debt has actually dropped from what was about $15,000 and change. That's for borrowing over 4 years, to down below $7,000 to about $6,800. And fewer students are borrowing, and this is true really across a number of schools with aid for international students. And we hope that that will mean that students not only are free of financial anxiety while they're at Harvard or at other schools in the United States, but that when they graduate, they actually will find that they'll be able to return to their country or pursue a career or a job of their choice that will lead them in the direction in which they most want to go and for which they've been prepared, and that will enable them to really contribute in the best way possible toward what is an increasingly global society. And so there is basically, just cutting through a lot of that, at Harvard, at Brown, at a number of other schools, a tremendous amount of financial aid available for students who are admitted. And you should just know that you shouldn't, at the schools that have financial aid for international students, consider finances to be a barrier. I know it seems a little bit scary, but you really shouldn't even think about it. The trick is to you think about the schools you might want to apply and spend time on your admissions application, and then of course follow the instructions for filing what is a fairly painless form for applying for financial aid. So good luck to all of you.
Thank you, Ms. Donahue, for your insights on financial aid. Now I'd like to reintroduce Professor Jack Cheng, the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the Chinese University, to give you information about the admission information for the Chinese University. Thanks.
Well, once again, welcome everyone to this seminar. I'm going to give you some local perspective and share some of the work that we've been doing and what we're looking for in COHK. Okay, right. Very briefly, just about the university now, we're about 10,000 undergraduate students and about 9,000 postgraduate students. It's a relatively young university comparing with, of course, Brown and Harvard, but we're working hard. And I think Professor Yang have shown you just now, we're coming to the age that we talk a lot about the outcome-based approach. So we started in the reverse order. What do we expect from our graduates and how we're going to do that? And of course, then, how we're going to tailor this to their mission. I think we can summarize, like Professor Yang just now, into we're looking for the cognitive side, the breadth of the knowledge, together with the depth in selective discipline, the skills, a basket of these basic skills. But language is very important, and we talk very much about bilingual, at least for the local students. The basic skills in numeracy, IT, communication, analytical skills, some professional skills if you are studying medicine, nurses, and so on. And of course, very importantly, the lifelong learning skill. Then there is quite a number of these effective features that we're looking for, because knowledge, skill, and attitude. And apart from a number of which has been mentioned, I think very important is to develop a multicultural understanding, appreciation, sensitivity, and tolerance with a global vision. And particularly, we also need to understand a lot more about mainland, what's happening across in mainland China, particularly for the local students. And we're expecting our graduates to be highly adaptable and able to work and contribute globally as a global citizen. So here are some of our expectations. So what we're looking for in the freshmen and students here, the quality students, we all stress very much, with different talents or different intelligence, Dr. Fitzsimmons just said, academic qualities, language abilities, non-academic qualities, and some special talents. And of course, the diversity of the students of various socio-economic background, cultural and ethnic background, different levels of maturity and experience, and of course also the able versus the disabled students. But before I move on, it is in fact a two-way process. The universities may be expecting, the certain type of students, but the students and the parents are looking at a university. They have a choice, or there are many choices for them. So it is a mutual two-way process. So how to achieve all these expectations that we've just mentioned? We need some of these factors in. We need to consider very hard, at least work towards this. Diversified admission mode, different selection processes for admission, enough scholarships and financial support schemes for different types of students, support for the disabled students, diversity of program where they can choose from, or combinations of program which is getting more and more important, quality educations and general education, policy and support for holistic development of the students, support for broadening the student experiences, international campus and international link, and of course also a sustainable development and environment in the various sense, from academic to humanistic and physical and cultural. So these are something we need to cover as we go on. So let's touch a little bit on some of these items, the diversified admission modes. For the local students, currently we are running a joint university admission program, which is for the whole of Hong Kong. And we have the self-recommended schemes from students who think they have special talents. And so we are admitting nearly 100 this year from this scheme. The school principals nomination scheme, which is in place for quite a few years, pretty well accepted, and we're admitting the largest number through this scheme among all the universities in Hong Kong. The sports scholarship scheme, the early admission scheme for those Form 6 in Hong Kong, it is an earlier, the JUPAS is Form 7 at the moment, but we're going to change that soon. And then a non-JUPAS admission scheme. For the non-local admissions, we have the international students and also the mainland students. And of course, now the new track for sub-degree holders and admission scheme for those associated degrees and higher diploma. The numbers are actually increasing quite significantly over the years. So there are various modes of admission. And then the selection process are becoming more mixed now. Apart from the academic results, which still the most important element is there, and then the non-academic achievements, language requirements, both in the Chinese and English for the local students. There are selective interview systems depending on the programs they are building in a different type. Some with a special interview panels, others with a general interview panels. So they may not be the teachers from the same, the program itself, but they're teachers from other programs and trying to get out from the students during the interview process other capabilities apart from the area that they are choosing for. So the scholarships and financial aids, there are a variety of these, but the university actually, in the COHK plus the colleges, we have more than 2,700 awards a year now, and the amount is about 50 million Hong Kong annually. This is not a big figure compared with Harvard, but of course, you know, taking care of the tuition fee here and the expenses is a much lower level. So we actually, it's quite a large sum, and that's increasing very significantly over the years that we've been trying to do. And for the support of disabled students, actually we have quite a number of disabled students in our campus, despite the fact that it's a very hilly campus in the COHK, and we have 2 Olympic, Paralympic, gold medalists studying in our university. One is the gold medalist in the wheelchair, Olympic champion. He's won about 6 gold medals now, and then the other one is the broccoli. So this is also a type of feeling. And apart from the balanced curriculum that they can choose from, general education, I think Professor Yang just mentioned, this is very much a very important part of the university ever since it was established in the 60s. And apart from university general education courses for the 4 main areas that they have to choose from, and also there are presence of this college general education. So there are many of these programs for the holistic development of the students that is organized by colleges and more than 200 student associations and clubs. And there are specific mentorship programs run by the colleges and also the University Central, the leadership development programs, where they have actually a dedicated credit unit system. So this is dedicated every year to about 30 students of them, and they expect to complete another 24 credit units on top of the usual requirements. So this is a special leadership development program, apart from many of the other general type of program. Internship programs to China Career Development and International Career Development Program, internship programs, locally, internationally, and also in mainland. We have the personal assistant training program where they are attached to the top executives, the expatriate top executives. Every year we have about 30 of them attached to them. They actually go to their boardroom and so on. So creating a very special experience of them. I'll talk a little bit about the student exchange. So here are some of the examples that we're working towards, and some of them are already in place. And of course, COHK, it's particular because we have the college system. Every student will belong to one of the 4 colleges, and in the years, we'll have a few more colleges established. Currently, there are more than 50% of our students are living in hostels. This is already the highest number among all the universities in Hong Kong. And so apart from that, it's the international teaching and learning environment so many courses are taught in English, and also quite a number of them in Chinese that the students can choose from. Many joint degrees are coming up. And we have the International Summer School accepting quite a few hundred students this year, and progressively is increasing at a very fast rate. And all the students coming from abroad and will be living in a mixed hostels and colleges. So they're not isolatedly living in a special block somewhere. So they're all mixed and intermingled with the local students and students from mainland China. So all the faculties, academic staff are gone through a process of worldwide recruitment. And you see that the academic staff in CUHK with the degrees, one or more degrees outside Hong Kong is actually 94% of them. So it's a pretty international in nature. And there are some of these distinguished professors, and I think Professor Yao is one of them here, and Professor Hu in the middle is a world-renowned botanist and on Chinese medicine. She's at the age of 100. Unfortunately, she cannot come to meet us today. So here are some of them. They actually will be spending a few months here in the university. And here is a list of some of the professors who graduated from Harvard, who are currently teaching in CUHK. I can assure this is not exhaustive, but at least 30-something of them around, right? So we do have quite a big community. And in the past 2 years, 2.5 years, we have 19 Nobel laureates lecturing in the CUHK. So that provide a very sort of special environment for the students to experience from. And then we have the ambassadors and the Council General Series, which is still going on once about every 4 to 6 weeks' time. And so just to share with you a little bit of some of our achievements, I think we mentioned about this, Professor Yang just now, the top 100 of the top 1,000 students admitted into the universities in Hong Kong, half of them comes to CUHK. You may wonder, the top 200 of them, 50% goes to CUHK. The top 100, 45% of them comes to CUHK. So that gives you a little bit of the understanding of the current situation. The CUHK admit the largest share of the first choice joint admission program, and you will see the number listed here and summarized in this chart. And in the past 10 years, we actually have 7 Rhodes Scholars from CUHK. All right, so that is a very important compliment. And we have the top winners in the ACCA examination. And about all the jobs offered by the Big Four accounting firms, more than 50% of them over the past 5 years has been allocated to the fresh graduates from the CUHK. And I think Professor Yang also summarized in the previous meetings that the top overall score in one of the Education Bureau employer survey, we become first in 7 out of the 9 categories and second in 2 of the other categories. And this is done through a very well conducted sort of survey program of more than 2,000 graduates who have worked more than 1 year in the institutions of different sizes, and these are the employers' rating. So these are all the compliments. And these are a list of some of the Rhodes Scholars from the CUHK over the past few years. Of course, we do have distinguished alumni, Professor Yao and Professor Lap Chi Tsui, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Hong Kong, is also one of our alumni. Vincent Chen, the HSBC Chairman of the whole Asia-Pacific region, is one of our graduates also. And about the broadening of the student mix, I think we all agree that this is a very important part of the university now, particularly with the current globalization. And so student exchange program is very important to the university's development for the students. And we actually started the first exchange program at UC Berkeley in 1965. And here is a list of some of the universities. More than 200 of them we have signed up with and are having an active exchange program ongoing. And this is the number of incoming. This year we're expecting more than 800 exchange students from 25 countries across the world. And our outgoing one is patching up because many of our students do still choose to go for 1 year rather than 1 semester. Those incoming ones are more from 1 semester, and that accounts for the differences there. But this number is actually growing in a way that we'll expect to reach about 1,000 in the coming 2 years' time. And this is just a picture with Larry, Vice Chancellor, with the most recent group of 400 students coming this semester. And the next semester will be another 400. And then in the summer vacation, we'll probably have another few hundred. So this is growing at a very fast rate. And one point I want to point it out is that in the past, most of the exchanges with the United States, but now progressively the percentage we're trying to reach a sort of more balance. And the latest figure shows that about 1/3 is from North America, 1/3 we're exchanging with European countries, and another third is Asian countries, now including Japan, Korea, and mainland China, Australia, and so on. So we think that it's a much better distribution of the incoming and also outgoing students. And apart from the formal exchange programs, we have many more short-term exchange programs where students spend weeks or months or summer elsewhere. And you see that the figure here, we actually have more than 80% of our students with at least one chance of joining in one of the programs, which ranges from a short-term one to a full one-year exchange program. And we're working hard on this, and we hope that every student, if they wish, they would have an opportunity to be involved in one of these exchange opportunities across the whole world. And I think just for Harvard and Brown University, I think for Harvard, we are the only one, which you name in your web page, that this is the approved year or semester study abroad program from Harvard students. And at Brown University, we're happy to hear that SHO Foundation have actually donated a significant sum of money to start our exchange program with Brown University. And actually, we'll be meeting and deciding on this next week. And then with the Yale New Asia Student Exchange Program has been ongoing for decades. And progressively, apart from those exchange programs, we are working on many of the student research attachment programs, which have been working out very well with Harvard, Caltech, MIT, and progressively many other universities. And of course, institutions like the NIH with the Student Internship Attachment Research Program. Here is from the Harvard College Study Abroad Program, and you see that here, Chinese University is listed here. There are quite a number of these students actually are now studying in Harvard, from biochemistry students, accountancy, mathematics, from Professor Yao, and then of course also MBA programs. This is just an example of some of the students who are now actually involved in exchange or study in Harvard. And of course, we're also keen to accept more full-time international students, but it's the government policy because we are all public universities. At the moment, we cannot take in more than 10% of our undergraduate quota for international students, and that includes students from mainland. These figures will be under consideration and review, and of course, we need a lot more other supportive services available before we can advance this further, and that's at the moment, it's a government's decision. For about the mainland students, and in the moment, I think including the postgraduate students, in CUHK, we actually have more than 2,000 students. And if you add on all the exchange students, we have about 2,600 students are non-local students actually studying in CUHK at various programs. And this is what we're admitting this year for the mainland students, 240 of them. And that's an orientation camp divided into the different groups here. And you will see that from figures here, apart from the top scorers, there are more than 100 of them around the top 500 in each of their provinces. And one province can mean 800,000 students applying for, because they're total together 9.5 million students just this year applying for university entrance. It's a huge figure. So we are having quite good students from that. Of course, we encourage students to participate in various forms of international competitions, national competitions in mainland China, in various forms from the Challenge Cup, which is a very prestigious competition among the 2,000 universities in mainland China. Sports competitions, we're doing pretty well. You will see here from the list that we joined the National University Sports Competitions there. And here are some of the prizes that were won over the past few years. Looking ahead, there are quite a number of major changes. The redefining the role of the Hong Kong SAR, the strategy, and the government's policy changes related to education, and also a migration towards the 3-3-4 curriculum. At the moment, it's 5+2. That's a British system. So 3-3-4 would mean that the junior high school, and then 4-year curriculum, which is really the same as what we're having in the United States and also across in mainland China. So these are some of the government policy changes: internationalization of higher education, relaxing the no-code student quota, actively considering that, and also they're forming a steering group headed by the Chief Secretary for Administration to how to help Hong Kong in developing as one of the regional educational hub, and the Legislative Council support is already in place. Then moving towards the 4-year curriculum, we're expecting many more refinements and changes in the university that range from the requirements of students, language enhancement, general educations, declaring newer learning goals, expanding the scopes and mode of admission, organize more double degrees, double majors, minors and choices, and emphasizing wider student experience, additional new colleges to be fully residential, at least for some of the colleges, develop better quality assurance systems, and so on. So with that, I would like to end this presentation. We look forward to a lot more interfacing between the university and the current secondary schools or high schools, because in the future, the selection of the students will be based on more and more mixed mode. And we have to understand a lot better, and the secondary schools need to understand a lot more about what the university is thinking and moving towards, and what are the expectations on the mutual side. And with that, thank you very much. Listening to this brief presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Cheng. And now with that, I'm very delighted to invite the distinguished Professor Yao Xing Tung to share a few words.
Well, thank you. I didn't expect to say anything, but I will say something. Well, I'm very much delighted to see both Harvard University and Brown University will show serious interest to offer students from Hong Kong to come to study in Harvard and Brown. When I was in middle school in Hong Kong, preaching middle school, whose principal is here, I was interested to see how to go to the best university in the world. But I was poor. I could not afford to do anything. But I was still interested in it. So I looked around to see where I can find a way to get into good university. First of all, I found that Harvard is basically impossible because of the expense, but also it's intimidating. As you probably found for most of the high school students here. But of course, I've been in Harvard for 20 years by now. I've seen many Hong Kong students. Some of them really perform excellently. And I really encourage you to try to apply for Brown or Harvard. My 2 children study in Harvard. Well, actually, they were admitted by MIT and Stanford and Harvard, but we finally chose Harvard, not because of the fact that I'm professor in Harvard. I get some tuition waiver. As a matter of fact, because my wife works in MIT, my 2 children, if they go to MIT, they get complete waiver of tuition. Instead, I have to pay full tuition for my 2 children in Harvard, which amount to close to $400,000 US for 4 years. But they choose to go to Harvard, and I'm glad that they go to Harvard because I think it's more balanced and they are happy. They enjoy the academic life in Harvard. They work very hard, I have to say. Don't underestimate the kind of work you have to put into undergraduate studies. They learn a great deal. They learn in many, many ways a very balanced undergraduate study. I'm proud of them. And they have tried and attempt to serve the society for general education. So I would like to see that many of my Hong Kong friends, my Hong Kong high school kids, would be also interesting to look at what Harvard have been able to promise for undergraduate education. Not necessarily come to Harvard, but at least see the goal of what Harvard attempt to do. And there are many, many things we can learn from Harvard and Brown. My wife actually studied in Brown as a master student, and certainly they provide the best undergraduate studies also. And I think also I've been in Chinese University of Hong Kong. We are not Harvard or Brown, realistically, but we are trying to catch up, and it's doing quite well. And I think these are all great universities. And Harvard is putting a lot of attention to Asia, which I think is a good intention, because we see the whole area is blooming, and we have produced, well, a huge amount of brilliant students. I saw quite a lot of them in Harvard, and I'm sure some of you would become leaders in this country, in the society here, and Harvard and Brown certainly could help. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yao. So now we're going to begin our question and answer session of the panel, where our speakers will be very happy to answer any of the questions that you have in the audience. But if I could first ask you guys just to move your seats to the front of the circle here. And so once again, we have Dr. William Fitzsimmons, Ms. Sarah Clark Donahue, Professor Jack Cheng, Mr. James Miller, and Professor Yao Xing Tung. Thank you.
So we welcome any types of questions related to mission or whatever other questions related to Brown or Harvard or the education system, higher education system in the United States. I think we welcome all the students and other members, teachers to ask any question. And when you raise a question, just identify yourself so that that will help. Okay, so the floor is open now. Yes, we have the microphone in every seat, so you just press on the button and then that will help. Yeah. Okay.
Testing. I'm Candy, reporter from Mingpao, and I have two questions actually. The first question goes to Ms. Clark. I would like to know, is it all international students whose family earn $60,000 below annually are eligible to apply the full financial aid? And the second question goes to both Harvard and Brown. I would like to know what is the average score for SAT for international students to get admitted in your program? Thanks a lot.
Thank you for that question. Let me answer first the financial aid question, and thank you for asking that question. Yes, all students are eligible to apply for financial aid, regardless of their family income, and I probably didn't make that clear in my comments. For students from families either in this country or our country or any country in the world whose family makes the equivalent of $60,000 US dollars. So I'm trying to think, what would that be here? That would be, yeah, no, I want 468,000 Hong Kong dollars. For that family, they would not be asked to contribute anything. So that student, if he or she, you were admitted, would receive a full financial aid award. Students from families of all different incomes apply for financial aid, and if they're admitted, will receive full financial aid funding to meet their need. And we have students from families with incomes of even over 200,000 US dollars qualifying for need-based financial aid. Not for as much of it, because we do expect the families to contribute some based on their circumstances. But we have, probably 1,300 students from families with incomes of over $100,000 US dollars receiving need-based scholarship assistance. And there's a wide range of scholarships, and absolutely everybody's eligible to apply.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing about the scholarships or the grants, or whatever you call them. They do not need to be repaid ever. You do not have to study a certain discipline. You do not have to achieve certain grades. There are no strings attached to these other than you have need for them. So you need to remember that, because that's not true of every scholarship everywhere in the world. So these come with no strings attached. We don't have any average SATs for international students. Most of our students do pretty well on the SAT. And international students do as well, although I will say for a number of our students, English is not their primary language, so the verbal score tends to be lower. Those of you who know anything about the SAT know that it's been changed in the last year or two. It used to be on this may not mean anything, it used to be on a 1,600 point scale. It's now on a 2,400 point scale, and the new piece is a writing piece, which is scored on a 200 to 800 scale. We don't know what to do with the writing piece yet. The SAT, its value is in predicting to some degree how students will do in university study, but that test is relatively new, so we have no idea what its predictive value is. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't try on it. You should do the best you can, but we don't know quite yet what to do with that test.
Dr. Fisherman, do we have any average SAT score for Harvard?
No, they're all way above average, actually. Just kidding. There's a little math joke there, Professor Yao. The thing I guess I would say to people is that test scores are, you could get a 2,400, so that would be terrific. But that wouldn't necessarily mean you'd get in, as it turns out. And I don't want to make things sound too hard, but let's say you were a person who had spent, as some Americans do, believe it or not, there's a guy in New York City who charges $800 per hour, American, to tutor you for the SATs. Think about that for a minute. It's not even clear how much good it does, but that's a whole other story. But there are people who sort of take test prep from the 7th grade all the way up. There are people from, say, Hong Kong or other places who just go off, don't take test prep, and take the test once. So when we look at a test score, we're trying to interpret what that means. What kind of opportunities have you had in your family, in your neighborhood, in your country, in your school, and then we'll try to see. And as Jim, went on at great length to tell you about, is we're going to look for a lot more than simply those test scores. So, for example, there are times when we will send an application on to our professors, let's say, and they'll look at the 2,400, let's say, if it is a 2,400, and then they'll say, well, that's nice, but there's nothing else in the folder of any interest to us. The grades are, okay, but not great. The recommendations to the teachers aren't particularly good. And you might even have some character questions, perhaps. So you wouldn't admit that person. To give you a non-weasel answer, though, to your question, the way it works these days, and we're still, obviously, the writing piece is still untested, and it's probably true that international students would perhaps not do quite as well on that writing piece. And there are times when they don't do quite as well on the critical reading piece either. Not because they're not incredibly bright, it's just that English is not the first language. So every time we look at that, we're trying to interpret what we have in front of us. But let's say in the United States, we usually talk about scores in terms of percentile. So despite all these, fact that people obsess about test scores, about a quarter of the people who end up at Harvard have test scores, and let's say in the old 1,600 point scale, that are below 1,400 points. So that's about a quarter of the class. And that's despite the fact that, again, we send some people along to our professors who will look at people with 1,600 but decide that that's not a very good case. So it's really quite a mix. So, we're going to take a look at your opportunities and then figure out what the right response should be.
Just a bit of information for our guests. We have 6 SAT examinations every year in Hong Kong. That's a lot of that. Yeah, any other questions? Yes, this lady, yes.
Hello. I have a daughter who's applying early to Brown this year. We have a very difficult question, a very difficult decision to make. We understand from parents and other people that being a Chinese, if you take Chinese SAT, even if you score 800, which is perfect score, it could be considered as a soft subject. And it might be to our advantage to take a foreign language like French. Even if we don't do as well, we stand out as a special student. How true is that? This is my first question. Second one, is it true that the more SAT subjects, subject tests you do, the better? Even though I know you're looking at 2 subjects, is it true that if we taken altogether 6 subjects, even though we don't do just as well, it would present a better case for the student?
Those are very good questions. May I have other questions? No, I'm only kidding. We would prefer, to be honest, that students not take a subject test in their native tongue, because we expect that they will do well. So if you can take, you do not have to take another language, but if you could take another subject test in something other than your native language, we would prefer that. In terms of taking more subject tests, and this is true for all the institutions that I know of, we will take your best scores whenever you take them. So we will look at your 2 best subject tests. So if you take 6, we will get all 6 scores, but we will only consider the 2 best. So there is no advantage to taking more unless you're going to score higher the more you take. There is a point, though, when taking more and more tests may become counterproductive, simply because psychometrically, particularly with the SAT, after about your 2nd or 3rd time, your test scores don't change. So to take it more than 2 or 3 times, as one of my colleagues said, is just brain damage, because the test is long and it takes 3.5 hours, so it's probably not worth it. But no, we will take, and that's true for the SAT. If your best critical reading score is the first time you take it, your best math score is the second time you take it, those are the 2 scores we will put together when we evaluate your application.
If any follow-up questions, one more chance.
So, would you encourage the student to try take a foreign language, even though she might not do as well?
No, we don't have a requirement that they take a foreign language subject test. I don't know if Harvard does. No, our stance is that students, except in their native tongue, should take subject tests in subjects they're familiar with and that they think they'll do well and in which they have an interest. And it may be 2 science scores, it may be 2 humanities scores. It's no requirement that you take a language test.
Would you like to comment on this, Christopher?
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, please.
Okay, is it okay? Okay. May I have the honor to answer the gentleman and lady from Harvard University? I'm an undergraduate student from CUHK Accounting School. Well, in my process of study business, I became very interested in business law, especially in the field of arbitration law. Well, my question lies in that I want to know, is it said in Harvard, the financial aid from different departments or colleges is quite different, especially in law school. Say if you want to take a Juris Doctor, well, it is connected with profession other than academy. So it is said that it is comparably difficult for me to apply a scholarship. Well, say if I take LLM or LLD, if I apply for such matter, I can get a easier scholarship. Well, I don't know it is a fact. Maybe you can make it clear for me. Thank you.
This is an important question. Is there any differential sort of scholarship award for different
Are there
programs?
any difference between different faculties or different college? So I think it's quite different for us, quite important for us.
That's a good question. I think what you're asking is are the financial aid programs different at the college and the law school or the business school or some of the other graduate divisions of Harvard University? And yes, they are. What I was describing is the financial aid program for Harvard College, and then my more general remarks were pertaining to undergraduate institutions in the United States. At the graduate level, the financial aid is really very different depending on the particular kind of graduate or professional school. At law schools, students will ordinarily be asked to borrow a lot more money. For international students at Harvard Law School, I know that that consists of an institutional loan, a Harvard loan, and then the grant would be less. Students are asked to borrow, you know, I actually don't know how much, probably about $15,000 to $20,000 a year, and then if there's need beyond that, they would receive grant assistance to meet that remaining need. In graduate schools of arts and sciences, for instance, there is a fair bit of academic scholarship money available for top-notch scholars, mathematicians, or scientists, and so students who are pursuing PhDs will often receive sort of what we call merit-based academic scholarships from graduate schools. Medical schools have a range of kinds of financial aid programs. Usually they ask students to borrow quite a bit more money. And that's because the salaries on the other end of that professional degree, whether it be medical school or law school, are really so much higher than the salaries in general in our country anyhow, that an undergraduate could earn after they graduated from college. The problem is it's not a simple answer. There's a huge mix of considerations that schools, graduate schools and professional schools will have as they consider how much money to award a student. And some of it is need-based and some of it is merit-based, meaning how much they want you, how bright they think you are, and so on and so forth.
I assume that these informations will be available if specifically.
Oh, absolutely. You can. I mean, the nice thing now is that you can certainly go online and research the kind of financial aid available at almost any program that you're interested in, and it's usually pretty readily available. The information about their financial aid.
Any? How about in Brown?
It's the same. The difference, the graduate schools have a different process. Again, arts and sciences schools they tend to, a lot of them for top students will fully fund. You pay nothing. Medical schools, you end up borrowing larger sums of money.
Right. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. We have yes, the lady in orange, yes.
Hello. My question isn't specifically about admissions. Oh, sorry, I'm Anastasia from Lipo Chun United World College. And it's more about Harvard in general, so for Mr. Fitzsimmons and Ms. Donahue. One of the major criticisms I've read is about having the graduate students and how that might take away from the undergraduate experience as opposed to a place like Princeton or the Little Ivies. And I'd like if you could please talk about the advantages of having them on campus and how that might add to an undergraduate experience.
Yes, and actually it's a bit of a moving target, such as the microphone. I started out, by just mentioning in passing that there have been very big changes at Harvard over the past few years, even in the freshman seminar program, because I think one of the concerns we started hearing, in fact, and it's been around for a long time, is that undergraduates did not get quite the attention that lots of people felt they deserved from full tenured faculty members and other full-time people as opposed to graduate students. So the one example was, 5 years ago we had 30 freshman seminars. That's 12 or fewer students in the seminar, and that was nice for the the small number of undergraduates who were able to get that, but unfortunately it didn't go very far. The changes have been very rapid, so now there are 130 freshman seminars available that virtually covers full demand that freshmen have. And just to give you an example, Larry Summers, who was our president for 5 years up to this past June, is a world-class economist, taught a freshman seminar on globalization. And that I think is a pretty rare opportunity for someone to have. He taught a freshman seminar all years except for one when he was president. The other time, the other year, he ended up teaching a course on globalization for a larger group. But the other professors were Michael Sandel, who's a world-famous ethicist, and the other person teaching was Tom Friedman, who's a world-class journalist who's written a number of books on globalization, Alexis and the Olive Tree, The World is Flat, and so forth. And that, I think, is a pretty good example of how this works. We also, this past year, as Sally indicated in terms of talking about advising, we did a survey about 5 years ago, and we discovered, I guess, two alarming things. One is that our advising wasn't very good. We also didn't find in our survey, we really looked at lots of different places, that nobody seemed to do advising really well. Of peer institutions like ours, we were below average. So we didn't think that was a very good thing for our undergraduates, so we went out, hired a woman away from Princeton who ran their advising program, Monique Ranieri, and we've made a number of changes, now implemented fully for the first time this year. And I think, among other things, we were able to get many, many more senior faculty and senior administrators into the advising crew for the first-year students. Along with, as Sally indicated, this new peer advising program. There are almost 200 undergraduates who not only help students make their course selections and get through the first, few weeks and so forth, but they also ally themselves socially with what we call entryways in the freshman dormitories, and sort of stay with them to help them through their social lives through the year, as well as their sort of advising and academic lives and other sort of more concrete choices. Way back 1,000 years ago when I was an undergraduate, when supposedly there was no, that was when there were real problems. In the 32 courses, I had 9 one-on-one courses with my professors. And that was because, and I would say 4 of them were with the chair of my department. And that's because I simply went and asked people if they would be willing to give a reading course, a research course, a one-on-one tutorial, whatever you want to talk about. And I would say at Harvard or at any of these places, the great, small colleges in the United States or the universities like ours, I think you can make them work for you just like a high school. If you simply go in and to office hours and make use of the facilities. I think in the first year I was kind of afraid of Harvard because, our high school really didn't like Harvard. We thought it was a bunch of, as I said, communists, atheists, rich snobs. You'd go there, you'd flunk out. And this was a Catholic high school 1,000 years ago, that you'd lose your soul if you went to Harvard. So naturally, that sounded terrific. I want to lose my soul. Sounds like fun, right? So you got kind of afraid of the place. But I think any of these places, if you use the advising system well, if you go into your professor's office hours, I think it can work out really well for you. One of the good things about going to, now look, the truth is, Harvard's 30 times better than it was when I was there, but so are all the other American universities. So I think all the great small colleges, the Bowdoins, the Williams, the Amherst, the long list, they really do produce what they claim they produce. They can give you small classes and I think very intimate experience. But frankly, today, we and Princeton and Brown and all these other places, we're trying to do the same thing. Now, sometimes I think it's a huge advantage if, say, you have this course on globalization taught by Larry Summers and Tom Friedman and Michael Sandel. That's going to be a popular course. It's going to be a large course because it's a great course and a popular course. I think it's a huge advantage, frankly, when you have a large course, to be able to call upon graduate students to run, sections, as we call them, discussion groups, perhaps of 10 or 15 or 20 students, depending on the course, once a week or periodically, so that you can get an in-depth look as well as the lectures. So I guess what I'm saying is the retention rates. In passing, 98% of the students who come to Harvard these days in September of their freshman year are going to graduate. But that kind of figure is true at all of the top places today. These are happy, productive places where you can pretty much get what you want if you just take the first step. But you've got to do that.
Actually, let me just add a little bit of an anecdote, which is that I mentioned my daughter briefly earlier, and who graduated in 1999, and she took a number of math and science courses because her concentration was environmental science and public policy. And I will say that one of the most fulfilling, stimulating academic experiences that she had was actually with a graduate student who was a tutor in one of her chemistry courses, who actually, with the house system that we described very briefly, there are 12 undergraduate houses that you move to in your sophomore year, and they have a housemaster and a senior tutor. The housemaster is a full faculty member. And then there are a number of tutors actually living in the houses, many of whom are in graduate school and will assist professors in teaching courses. And this particular chemistry tutor was well known in the college as being actually maybe one of the best chemistry teachers in the college, although he was young and still pursuing his graduate degree. And so, every once in a while you'll catch a rising star that way in an environment that is very stimulating and really augments, as Bill said, the experience with the full professor in that course. So, and I know that our Graduate School of Arts and Sciences is paying an increasing amount of attention to teaching graduate students how to teach and to actually making sure that they're fully engaged in the process. So I don't think, at least based on my daughter's experience, that it's an entirely negative thing to have graduate students involved in undergraduate teaching.
By the way, we happen to have an actual full professor right here live on the stage. How would you answer that question?
How much time you spend talking to students?
I spend a lot of time to talk with undergraduate students. And at least in the mathematics department in Harvard, we spend a lot of time to talk with undergraduate students. We have only 16 senior faculties, 28 altogether, including assistant professors and all that. But we do consider teaching undergraduate to be one of our most important duty. In fact, the faculty discuss about all the undergraduate students in the mathematics thoroughly, about twice at least a year, to understand how they perform, whether they're doing okay, and in great detail. And we are very happy that this goes on constantly. We're also watching how the graduate students teach the undergraduate, and we have professional people to train our graduate students to make sure they teach well. So when graduate students come the first year, they don't have to teach. We train them. So by the second year, graduate student, they do very well. And they understand the young undergraduate better in most cases because they are around the same age. And I do think that it has been a good job for them. I don't think we have much complaint about our teaching in undergraduate. And also very importantly, I think in a good university like Harvard, at least for those undergraduate students who want to do research, they do have excitement when they see their teachers did a great research. When there's some big important research was accomplished, the undergraduates also know it. So that is something that is difficult to find in other places.
We're open for other questions. Yes, gentlemen, then.
Thank you. A question for Harvard and Brown universities on the subject of evaluation of academic performance for international students applicants. Other than SAT, say in the States, in many other countries, I presume, so many other countries, the students are interested in applying for both of your universities. For each country, there's different system of national examinations. What have you? Hong Kong, we got HK, AL, GC, SE for the UK, and IB for France. On the subject how to evaluate on a fair basis and just basis, just to minimize or even eliminate, say, unfair parities, say, when evaluating different results that are coming out from so many different types of national examinations. Obviously, there's maybe some discrepancies in terms of quality for many of those. So how we do about it?
Well, to begin, we have a number of staff members. I mentioned, I think at Brown, we have about 20 to 25 staff members a year. We have people who are experts in all the various leaving exams from the various countries. They spend a lot of time reading those applications and have a very good understanding of the systems. The second thing we all do are validity studies. So we look at the performance of students after they've been at our institutions for a while and go back and look at the credentials they had coming in to figure out whether those credentials are predictive of their performance. So over the years, we have a pretty good sense of what IB results, what good IB results are, how they predict performance, or you know, what the abitur does. It doesn't matter necessarily what the exam is. We have a lot of experience in each one. And we do a lot of validity studies over the years to, we hope, affirm our choices, or in fact, in future years, change them because we weren't evaluating the credentials correctly.
No, that's right. All right, so, yes, any questions? This lady, we'll go back to you in a moment. Right?
In light of the fact that many top colleges have gotten rid of the early application option for students next year, does this affect the students applying early this year at all?
No. This year is business as usual. We are, however, we announced that we were on September 12th that we were going to do away with early admission programs starting next year. So far, Princeton University and University of Virginia have decided to do the same thing. I actually talked to the people at those two universities after they made the decision and invited them to come out with us recruiting in the fall when we would have been sitting there doing early admission programs. So you might, that would include, of course, not just, you know, that we'd be out visiting in the United States, but we also would be visiting internationally. I look at dropping early admission as a good thing for a whole bunch of reasons. I won't bore you to tears, you know, for why we think it's a good thing. But among other things, we're going to be out there, I think, with a better opportunity to talk to people about applying. These are people who might not have thought about applying, many of whom will be international students, many of whom will be students, say, from backgrounds and high schools that normally might not send people to Harvard. We're going to be out there at the end of October and November and maybe into December sort of making a case for why they might want to think about applying. And we'll be able to say that we still have all of our places, you know, sort of ready for them should they decide to apply. But we don't know, honestly, yet whether it will, you know, the dropping of early admission programs will be a huge number of colleges next year or not. Now remember, there are plenty of places in the States already that don't have early admission programs, don't have binding early decision, or don't have so-called early action, a single choice early action. Many of the great state universities have rolling admissions, they have other form of admission. So anyway, we'll see what happens.
So will early applicants or will early admissions be carry much weight at all this year? Or
it will carry the same weight with us that it always has, and that is that it's not an advantage, honestly, if you apply early to us. We do not believe it is. The problem is that it's hard to convince anybody of that. We haven't been very successful. If you want to apply early to us, it's a November 1 deadline. That's terrific. But if you want to apply, wait and think about it a little bit more and apply regular, that's fine too. We'll ultimately make the same decision on your application, regardless of whenever you apply. And obviously, the same thing goes for your financial aid too.
That was my question just now. The early admissions I was going to ask the same question as she.
Other questions? Yes. Yeah, let's entertain one from this side. Okay. Yes.
Hi, I'm a student from Shenzhen Middle School, and thank you the professor from Harvard and Brown universities. And I'm a student. Have spent most of my time on doing more challenging or difficult things outside the schools, like electrical experiment. And I also have a popular website called I Don't Like Exams.
I don't like exams.
And my question is, what can I do to help you know more things about me beside the SAT or the GPA? Thank you.
I don't know, I'm going to your website as soon as I leave. I think all of us in our application processes give you the opportunity to tell us as much as you want to tell us about yourself. We have prescribed materials we want you to submit, but people submit other things. I did forget to mention that. If you're a musician and you want to submit a CD or a tape, you can do that, and we'll have it evaluated by the music department. If you're an actor, if you're if you're an artist, we have it evaluated by the drama department or the music or the art department. So anything that you want to tell us, we're delighted to get. The key here is to give us as much information as you can give us that's substantive. There is a point, and you need to be careful not to cross the line. There's a point at which quantity is not as good as quality. One point in my career, I remember a student who submitted everything he had ever done from the 7th grade. So we got boxes of material with spelling homework and math homework, and he was not admitted. So you can give us lots of information, but please make sure it's substantive. Most of the students who apply simply send us what we ask for. But if there is extra material you want to send, as I said, CDs or portfolios or your website work, we're delighted to get it, and we'll evaluate it.
Yeah, and I would say our engineering people would be happy to take a look at any projects you've completed or experiments and so forth. But there are, great excesses. I think some people believe that, that sending a lot of recommendations in is a good idea, and one year a person decided to send one every day for almost 3 months. And you can imagine how large that folder became. And so overkill is something to be avoided. People have sent in food, believe it or not, chocolate chip cookies and date nut bread and all kinds of things. I mean, you wouldn't believe what gets sent in to colleges and universities. So I think Jim's point about it, making sure that it's substantive. Is a fair point.
Yeah, when we get the food, we don't eat it, by the way.
Yeah.
Someone does.
We hire a student to try it first.
No, we don't.
We probably have time for, one or two last questions, maybe that gentleman at the back. Yeah.
I'm Thomas from West Island School, and I've just 2 simple questions. Recently, I was told by someone that when you write an essay for the application of university, if you try to be humorous, it's going to backfire. And the next question is, because the Hong Kong education system is slightly different from the American system, will you recommend a student to go to American university after year 12 or after year 13? the Hong Kong system is same as the British system?
Let me take the essay.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a very good question about essays. Humor is a very subjective thing, and what you may think is hysterically funny, the people reading it may not. So you may want to, you may want to have other people read it and see if they think it's hysterically funny as well. The truth is that it's usually, unless you're really convinced you're very funny, it's better to play it in a more serious mode. There are students every year, we were talking about people sending in food, who write gimmick essays. They write them in concentric circles, so you keep spinning the paper to read them. Or they write them backwards, so you have to hold it up to a mirror to read it. And my particular favorite was a student who wrote his essay in blood. Our reaction. It was, I will bleed to come to your institution. And nobody would read it, because nobody would pick it up to read it. And so the question we thought was, it's not 500 words or 2 pints, whichever comes first, of blood. So it's important that you try to be not deadly serious, but try to answer the question and be careful about humor, because it can be misinterpreted sometimes by the reader.
Yeah, there are essay books out there. Guess what? We know they're out there. And we also know that there are websites out there where you can purchase essays, and so there's a lot of stuff written about essays. Yeah, that's right. You're all set now. But I just think it is important not to try to be famous for 15 minutes, as they say, but to try to represent yourself and your values and what you believe in. I think there have been essays that have had some humor in them that have been fine. But you remember, in our committee, there are 30 people roughly, all different ages and backgrounds. We've got, another 20 or so senior faculty, and we've got sometimes administrators who will read. So you never quite know who's going to read the essay and exactly, how it might be interpreted. So I think, and it's pretty serious business. We're trying to do our best to admit, good students. So don't shoot yourself in the foot, I would say. Do no harm first, and then, kind of see where to go from there. I know it's very popular to graduate, I guess, that get out in the 12th grade and go on. And you were telling me, and others have been telling me, that some of the better students in Hong Kong actually do want to go on to college after the 12th grade. I'm not sure how we get in the way of that train, except to say that there are lots of times that being a little bit older and having a little bit more experience, and maybe even developing that set of credentials that comes out of that extra year, can make not just a big difference in terms of getting into a university, but can actually make a big difference in terms of growth and in terms of your ability to make full use of a college education. Our colleges are not all about getting through as quickly as possible onto the next set of credentials. One of the reasons we gave up early admission is that we felt that too often students were in a rush, to make a premature college choice. I will tell you, I started out thinking at the beginning of my junior year, beginning of my senior year, that I wanted a small school in the country. And I learned a lot that senior year by visiting colleges, by talking to other classmates who were visiting colleges and thinking about it. And I won't bring you through my whole thing, but I just, at the end of that period of time, I ended up choosing to go to Harvard rather than a small college for a whole bunch of different reasons. The other thing I will just put in a little pitch for, in the year 2000, we wrote a paper called Timeout or Burnout, and what we were arguing for was the idea of doing the so-called gap year, which is very popular in the UK. And for about 30 plus years, we've been offering all admitted students the opportunity to take a year off before coming. All they have to do is, just write to us, let us know what they're going to be doing. Fortunately, I think we've begun to make some progress. There are more people thinking about that gap year. Even if they don't take the gap year, lots of times we've given people at least an idea that maybe it isn't a great thing to rush through to 80 years old without looking sideways and keeping the blinders on the entire time. And so a fair number of students now will get involved in research with their professors or so forth, and then they decide they might take time off during college or maybe even do a study abroad kind of thing, or even do a study abroad during the summer kind of experience, or take a year off after college. Now, Professor Yao, one of Professor Yao's children is taking, you might want to describe that year off because it's quite remarkable. So I guess what we're saying is don't be in a hurry. We'll look at you at the end of 12 years. We'd probably prefer to see you at the end of 13 years. But we don't have any quotas or any rigid ideas about what we're going to do. We have people, as Jimmy suggested, we have people who go to very, sort of prescribed, schools where the curriculum is very, sort of straightforward and so forth. We have people who are practically raised by wolves, out there. They've been homeschooled, their entire life. They live in the desert or whatever, We have people from all over the world, from all different kinds of backgrounds. So anyway, the year off for your son. What about?
Oh, my son, my second son, decided to, after graduating from Harvard, decided to take 2 years actually off. She is helping David Ho in Kunming about the AIDS program. So he feels good about it, and we encourage him to do so. He sees the world, and he sees how he can help people before he applies for medicine. And I think that's a good thing. So we encourage him to do so. Life is long, and there are many things you can do.
Thank you all. I think in the interest of time, we'll probably have to close this questioning session. And thanks all for coming here. And may I invite you to thank the panel speakers once again.
Well, once again, thank you for all of your questions and for your answers to the questions. I'd like to introduce Professor Kenneth Young, the Pro Vice Chancellor at CUHK. And he's going to present our speakers with souvenirs of their trip to the Chinese university. So first, he'll present it to Dr. Fitzsimmons.
Thank you so much.
And now Ms. Donahue. And Dean Miller.